Matt Dunlap, Secretary of State, State of Maine. And you would hope that you would be heard in the White House, quite frankly. You would hope that the people in Congress, if you have something valuable to say, would listen to that. But, you know, the history of trying to control information for various purposes as a policymaker is not one that is seamlessly pretty. You know, there have been a lot of motivations behind government officials trying to control events through this dissemination of information, or the aggregation of protest groups. You know, how do you control that? I mean, Abraham Lincoln suspended the writs of habeas corpus during the Civil War. Of course, it was a war measure. And that's what's been said about the time that we're in. We're in a time of war. This is a war on terror. You know, all bets are off. And I think that reasonably people should ask, you know, what security do I have as a citizen of a free republic that my government is not going to be working against my best interests, claiming to work for them, but perhaps for some other policy goal, some other policy agenda. And those are legitimate questions. And you can ask those questions without accusing anybody of anything. You know, I believe that the federal government is doing its very best. You know, nobody wants to be asleep at the switch if there's another terrorist attack. But at the same time, you know, if you lock everything down and make everybody show their papers, had the terrorists really won at that point? Have we given up our freedoms and live in fear at every turn of some next attack? I think the issue of identity security is going to be a moving target for a long time, and I don't think we'll ever really reach it, you know, until you're taking someone's fingerprint at birth and logging it into a system and assigning a whole skein of identity measures to that individual, to which they must match for any transaction, public or private. And that's not a free society at all, in my opinion, and I don't think anybody would agree that it is. I've always been a big supporter of law enforcement. I have law enforcement under me. I oversaw law enforcement as a member of the legislature, as a chair of a policy committee that dealt with conservation law. And when we would talk about, in policy debates about, you know, some legal initiative, and law enforcement would press for the tool. You know, this is an important tool for us to have to enforce this law. Every once in a while, you kind of have to hold up your hands and say, look, you got to take the risk that once in a while the bad guys are going to get away. You know, you can't stop every fisherman, check their coolers for short trout all the time. You know, because people just won't accept that. You have to have some type of reasonable suspicion that a violation of law has occurred. And I think, you know, that in trying to make things so easy for our law enforcement, they want to have access to, you know, phone records. They want to have access to your library records, access to your travel patterns, etc. Yeah, it makes their life easy as heck, but it also has you under an unblinking eye, that constant scrutiny of law enforcement, and who is going to be accessing that information about you. Is it, you know, again, is there an allegation that Matt Dunlap's committed a crime and an investigator is going to check it out, or is somebody just going to be watching me for the hell of it sometime, you know? And that's the discomfort, is who's going to have access to that information about you? What are they going to do with it? You know, is there going to be suddenly an initiative saying, you know, these people are all doing this activity, we need to crack down on that, you know? There was great consternation during the Vietnam War about war protesters. And many of them were tracked by the FBI. You know, were they communists? You know, were they agitators? You know, we lived through the House Un-American Activities Committee, where people had their lives and careers destroyed because of their affiliations with political organizations that were deemed to be unfriendly to the interests of the United States. Who made that determination that they were unfriendly? Who made that determination that your activity in that organization was going to cause this country harm? You know, and when those questions are being asked of you as an individual, you know, the relevance of who's making the initial inquiry is lost because you're under the gun.